Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 DocLands Documentary Film Festival. I'm Kelly Clement from the programming team, and I'm here with Director Julia Bacha to talk about her film Boycott, which recently screened at the South by Southwest Film Festival and the Human Rights Watch Festival. And it's going on all around the country now. It's on its journey. And I also just want to mention that Boycott is being included in the DocLands education program, and that high school students will also be tuned into this powerful documentary. So, Julia, thank you for making this powerful and enlightening documentary on the battle over freedom of speech laws. In this case, the very charged topic of anti-boycott legislation. It's a very incredible investigative journalism here, and is also about could be a controversial subject and will definitely lead to great debate. So how did this filmic journey begin? What inspired you to tell the story of this particular issue?
Thank you so much, Kelly, for having me for this Q&A and the entire DocLands team. It's a huge privilege to have our California premiere as part of the festival. And I am incredibly honored to be able to bring this story that has been largely under-documented by the American press, despite its huge consequences to the freedoms of everyday Americans. I've been making documentaries as part of the team at Just Vision for 17 years now. And Just Vision is dedicated to filling a media gap on coverage related to Israel and Palestine. Most of our films up until Boycott have focused on stories of Palestinians and Israelis in the Middle East. And this is our first foray into looking at how Israel and Palestine plays out in the United States. And we decided to tell the story because we heard that there were increasingly attempts in the United States as well as in Europe to mirror some of the legislation that had been passed in Israel, trying to criminalize or punish attempts by individuals who were calling for Israel to be held accountable for its human rights records through boycotts, divestments, and sanctions. Now, boycotts, divestments, and sanctions are a strategy that have been used historically by many social justice movements. We see today how important a tool it is during the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, when you cannot go to war, is one of the few tools to hold the powerful accountable. And there were laws that were beginning to say that Americans, if they wanted to keep their public jobs, they had to sign a pledge that they would not be engaged in a boycott of one particular foreign country, Israel. And we knew that this law not only placed a huge risk to organizers who are advocating for Palestinian human rights, but we knew that this was also a threat to other movements because this law could be used eventually as a template for targeting other social justice movements. So we embarked on documenting this story 4 years ago now, and we are delighted to be bringing it to audiences today.
Yeah, it's just amazing to me to find out that these anti-boycott laws exist in over half the country, 33 states. And it's not just the liberal versus the conservatives, it's laws that are being passed by bipartisan politicians. And as one of your subjects says, anti-boycott laws are opening up a Pandora's box for free speech.
Yes, I think it's a surprise often when people hear that these laws exist in California and that a version of this law exists in New York. These are not laws that are being passed only by Republicans. Democrats have been supporting this legislation. And now, though, there is an interesting dynamic because the anti-boycott law targeting people advocating for Palestinian human rights is being used as a template to attack those advocating for a more safety in terms of more gun control laws or in terms of fighting against climate change. So there are now laws that exist in several states that say that if you want to keep your public contract, you need to sign a pledge that you will not boycott or divest from the fossil fuel industry or from the gun industry. And now Democrats are not voting for that. But because they voted for the original version of the bill, to try to fight it, arguing that it's a violation of the First Amendment poses a challenge, because you have to be principled about your stances. There is no First Amendment exception to Palestine. And so that's, I think, what we really need to learn from this lesson is being principled and making sure that we uphold the values we know are important for our society.
And yeah, that's good timing. And talk about your three main subjects. They're all from different political backgrounds, right? What were their initial reactions to being asked to be in a documentary?
Yeah, it's, one of the privileges of making films with the team at Just Vision is that all of our films profile incredibly courageous individuals. So from our very first films through Budrus, through My Neighborhood, Nile India Uprising, they all talk about very difficult subjects, but they center incredible individuals who are creating change. And so I got to spend time with Bahia Maui, who is the Palestinian speech therapist in Texas, Alan Leverett, who is the publisher of the Arkansas Times, and with Mick Jordal, who is a lawyer in Arizona. And each of these individuals had public contracts with their respective states. And many of them had these contracts, all of them actually had these contracts for more than a decade when this new clause around the anti-boycott law appeared. And the three of them and they're not actually the only ones. There are several other people who faced this and decided to sue as well, but the film centers on these three individuals. They are doing it for very different reasons. They're suing and taking enormous risk to their livelihood for different motivations. And that's why we chose them, because we wanted to show the diversity of individuals who are engaging on this issue. Alan Leverett, who is the publisher of the Arkansas Times, for example, didn't even know that there was such a thing as a movement to boycott Israel in order to uphold Palestinian human rights. He heard about it for the first time when it showed up in his contract. And he has no intention of boycotting anyone. He wants to be able to continue providing excellent coverage of local Arkansas stories. And he thought that that clause was quite strange, because it put a request for a media institution to take a political public stand on a very controversial issue in America. And he said very clearly, and he always says this at film festivals, that the Arkansas Times is not for sales, that their political positions are not for sale for the government to say, you have to take this position or else you don't get any money. So he sued on principle. Bahia Maui, the Palestinian America, is deeply personally involved with this issue. She does not want her purchasing decisions to be part and parcel of supporting the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian people. She has family members in the West Bank. And so she feels it's very important for her to be able to make decisions of how she spends her own money. And so she sued because of that. And Mick Jordal, who is the lawyer in Arizona, is someone who has been very active on many progressive issues. He's active in the Democratic Party in Arizona. And during a trip with his son for the son's bar mitzvah in the West Bank, he saw what was going on in the West Bank and decided that he did not want to be part of it or complicit through his purchasing decisions. And so he also decided to sue the state of Arizona.
Wow. So all of these subjects of yours, their careers were at stake, but they decided to take the big risk. How did you get them to trust you?
Well, I did not make any of them sue. They all made that decision completely on their own, obviously. And when I kind of came in the picture, they were already on their journeys. And I think the main thing was in terms of allowing me to film with them and in the intimacy of their families, and also following, some of the political challenges that they faced. This was a process that I think many filmmakers go through of building trust with each one of them individually over time, explaining motivations for our team for making this film. I think the fact that our team had made so many films on this issue and had a solid track record created a lot of confidence on people to know that we would be approaching this issue with a lot of honesty.
Yeah. Now you say that bills like this have been spreading to other parts of the world. Is there any resistance in these other countries? that's forming, they all affect our ability to protest for political and social change.
Yeah, so what's interesting to see is how these bills, versions of these bills are now being introduced in Europe. The United Kingdom actually just recently, a couple of months ago, passed an amendment. And the way that they are approaching this law is that they're actually going even further and saying that, that you cannot boycott any country if it goes against the foreign affairs interests of the United Kingdom, which creates all kinds of complications, like who do you go for permission if you want to boycott someone? It's really feels like the kind of action that authoritarian regimes take, not one of thriving democracies. And it's quite shocking how much these bills are able to just slide through with very little public conversation and debate. And that's why we decided to make this film.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I found most compelling was the historical connections the film makes to early civil rights protests and boycotts, including the Montgomery bus boycott and the college campus boycotts from about South Africa and the apartheid. And can you talk more about that, how you decided to put that in and form the structure of this film?
Oftentimes, when you don't put boycotts in historical perspective, it can feel like a relatively small story, especially when we're living at the times that we're living, where there's so much turmoil and upheaval, and there's so many immediate fires that it seems we have to be addressing all the time. But the reality is that if you look at the big moments of historical change that many of us would say are some of the proudest moments of our societies these days, of how we were able to move, actually have progress in terms of equality, in terms of justice, boycotts are at the center of those movements. There are very few direct ways that individuals can band together and have community power. And in a consumer society that we live in a capitalist society that we live in, the idea of withholding your purchasing from, be it companies, states, groups, is one of the most powerful tools that we have outside of voting. And it is a really critical thing for people to reflect what it would have meant if boycotts had not been available during the civil rights era as a tool. If boycotting had been banned when people were trying to address apartheid in South Africa, or if Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta hadn't been able to use boycotts in order to create safer and better working conditions to farm workers in California. And when we understand that, then I think the urgency of this issue becomes a lot clearer. So it was really important for us to include that in the film and to make people understand that. And I think today, I referenced this earlier, but if we had any doubts about the importance of boycott, divestment, and sanctions, this tragic moment that we're living in Europe should really bring that home very clearly. The only tool that is available right now to governments to address what's happening in the Ukraine are boycotts, divestment, and sanctions. That's all they can do.
Yeah.
And so we need to be very clear that those are tools that need to be preserved. We cannot be chipping away at our ability to use those rights because of political interest groups. These tools need to be preserved for everyone for the future.
Yeah, and not just in Europe, but here in the United States.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, as I mentioned, this will also be part of our educational screenings. And because we found it to be such a great civics resource for high school students. It addresses the intersection of politics, law, and civil rights. And so I do hope that you have some kind of plan to get this film out in schools.
Yes, our team at Just Vision, which produces the film, is very dedicated to making sure that all of our films become tools in the hands of educators across the country. So we are in the fall of this year, fall of 2022, we're launching our educational impact campaign, where we're going to be going first to campuses and universities and eventually high schools as well, in partnerships with educators that want to develop curriculum that goes alongside the film to make sure that students can use it.
Yeah, well, it would be great if you could further clarify what rights that students have as students and minors, especially, particularly when their generation has become much more active in protesting issues like climate change and systemic racism. How can they fit this in?
Well, I think students are teaching us lessons these days.
That's true.
More than
Very
I can
true.
teach them. But I think one of the things that I really hope they are alerted to is particularly on the issue of environmental justice, that there is a very strong push right now to use these anti-boycott bills to target the progress that has been made by the environmental movement in America. You know, over years and decades, really, the environmental movement advocated in boardrooms of companies and corporations for decisions and screens to be made in terms of investments, so that investments would not be made anymore in the fossil fuel industry.
Right.
Because the fossil fuel destroy the earth. And over a long time, they were able to convince many shareholders and CEOs to start creating gains on their investments, which were huge victories. And now states like Texas are putting on the books laws that say that if your company or if your bank has a screen about not investing in the fossil fuels industry, you cannot do business with our state anymore. And these are big contracts that banks, corporations, and engineering companies would lose with the state of Texas. And government has no business getting involved in the decisions at that level. You know, there is a really dangerous, as I mentioned, authoritarianism about these laws creeping into decisions of how you spend your money. For me, there's a huge irony in how much, you know, in this case in particular, these laws are being pushed by conservatives who claim to want to keep government small and out of people's lives and let business decide, you know, let actually business do its thing the way it wants to do. Government shouldn't have control. Government shouldn't get in the business of businesses. And this is like the ultimate way of actually really infringing on the ability of businesses to operate with morals and values. The other thing that is very ironic, that, you know, if you look at what it will entail in terms of bloating the governments to be able to make these laws actually work, the amount of checking of everything that a company is doing, they're going to have to hire a lot of people. They're going to have to blow. So in terms of like wanting to keep small government, reducing taxes, all of these are completely against everything that Republicans and conservatives leaders claim to believe in. So I also hope that Americans across political persuasions will see through this and understand that it's not for anyone's benefit.
Well, thank you very much. And have your subjects been able to see this film? And what was their reaction? Any new updates?
Protagonists?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, it's been great. We've got to have many festival screenings where Bahia, Mick, Ellen, and also Lakin, Mick's son, got to be part of. And they are so committed to this film and to taking it on the road and to traveling with it, and have been incredibly supportive, which, means a ton for our entire team.
What are you working on now? What's your next project?
Right now, I am working on getting this film distributed as widely as possible. And that's what I am narrowly focused in.
And you have many more festivals coming.
Yeah, the film is making its way across film festivals and communities. And if you want to know where the film is going next, please go to justvision.org. That's JUSTVISION.org.
Yes, and then people will be able to find out where it's going to be screening next.
Yes.
Any plans for broadcast?
We're hoping to have a broadcast in spring of 2023, and hopefully we'll be able to share more about that soon.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Julia. This was an incredible film and just a very valuable tool, and hopefully awaken a lot of people.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your support.
Okay, looking forward to your next film. Bye.
Bye.